I was in prison for 15 years. There was a skinwalker in there with us. A little background first. I was serving a 15-year sentence in a penitentiary in southern Arizona. What I was in there for isn't important. During my stay there was countless things that happened that no one could explain, and even more that no one wanted to know more about. It all started with a prison legend. Supposedly years ago, something awful and unexplainable happened in the prison. Every morning we wake up and expect to stand near the front of our cells while guards visually confirm we were present and accounted for. Apparently, about a year before I got sent there, the most brutal and unexplainable thing happened during one of those routines. A man who had a cell to himself looked very different during this check. When a guard pulled over another guard to help him check it out, they found it wasn't actually the prisoner they were expecting at all. It was a totally different man. This man was wearing the skin of the other man over him, loosely fitted, draped over him. Apparently, it looked like a real monster. The scariest things were, though, was the guy wearing the skin was not an inmate. They had no idea how he even got into the prison, let alone his cell. What's worse is they couldn't even figure out who the hell he was. He wasn't documented anywhere, and what's worse than that is they never found the body of the man of the skin he was wearing. Pretty grisly stuff, I know. I realize that's not the go-to definition of a skinwalker, but that's what the prison called him, the skinwalker. Didn't help that the guy never talked apparently. Anyway, that's what started the whole skinwalker superstition around the yard. Finally, the guy got shipped to a different spot about a month after it happened, and just about everyone in Gin Pop felt all the better for it. I heard that story on the second day of my stay. Hell of a story to hear in the place that's gonna be your home for the foreseeable future. Now into the real shit, though. Sure, that guy was a skinwalker, but all he did in the long run was get an old wife or Navajo inmate to tell everyone about actual skinwalkers. It seemed like a lot of the prison culture actually revolved around them. Now, apparently, skinwalkers are tricky to point out on the spot, but if you manage to survive around one for more than a minute or two, almost everyone can tell their mannerisms are all off. They can mimic human speech but not replicate it. They twitch manically, and they have a natural gait while walking, but apparently they got better with experience. The old Nauvoo guy, his name was Carl, said that he was sure there was an actual one among the prisoners, slowly picking us off over the years. He called it the Grand Master Skinwalker. At one point, apparently, he thought it had human mannerisms down so well that you might not even be able to tell if it was your cellmate for a day or two. It had to be good, he posited one night. He would expect a skinwalker to jump out at any opportunity for a kill, but this one realized it had a revolving door of people to kill coming to it, and masterfully bided its time, as Carl thought for years. A lot of guys find humor in it. A lot more really on edge about it. Every once in a while in prison, people snap. Sometimes you'll find your cellmate swinging in front of your bunk, straight up around the neck by his pant leg. Sometimes you just can't take it anymore. But in our yard, people tend to snap in a very special way. It wouldn't be an outburst at dinner or a silent self-elimination in the night. Guys would just stop talking, hunch over, and shuffle around. Any friendships they had would be mostly out the window. They would turn into a loner during rec time, and they would let their hair hang in front of their face. No one liked to talk about it, like if they did, it would happen to them next. I felt the same way. I didn't know if it was a skinwalker or just people going crazy, but I didn't want to find out. It wasn't clockwork or anything, but every time someone snapped in this way, it wasn't more than a couple weeks before they were shipped off or transferred to God knows where without anyone knowing else beforehand. Then there was the nighttime occurrences. Short, loud bursts of sound echoed through my cell block during all hours of the night on a regular basis. It sounded like a mix between pigs dying squeals and nails on a chalkboard. Just another thing no one liked to talk about. Even scarier were the shadows and footsteps. The block was dimly illuminated in the night by a few lights hanging from the ceiling outside the cells. I myself saw shadows fly across my walls on a regular basis when there were definitely no guards near my cell. One time near the end of my sentence, I woke up, looked on my back wall, and found a perfect silhouette of a human standing there. But when I looked back, my bunkmate was asleep, and no one was outside my cell. And the footsteps, everyone hated the fucking footsteps. They were the scariest part. In the night, sometimes more rare than the shadows, you would hear ungodly fast footsteps. They sounded like wet feet slapping on tile floor. Whatever caused them would fly from one end of the block to the other end in a dead sprint. Whatever it was inhumanly fast. If you happened to be awake before it started, by the time you heard the footsteps on one side of your cell and whipped your head around to see the thing run by, it sounded like it was 3 cells past you. Everyone hated the footsteps. I agree. I thought they were the worst. I was released from that place about a month ago, and I have more stories than I can count. I swear it was nearly my turn. About a week before I was discharged, my cellmate and a good friend of mine snapped in the same kind of way. I didn't sleep for an entire week. Well, I did sleep, of course, but never for more than a few minutes at a time. I never turned my back on the guy. The scariest thing, I woke up one night to him somehow snaking his body through the bars of our cell. For reference, I couldn't get anything past my shoulder through them. The worst part, though, he was coming back into our cell. On the day of my release, I didn't say a word to him. I just left. He seemed fine with it. So was I. I had made it through 15 years of prison fights, gang disputes, and all I know, skinwalker abductions. I left through the front gate, a free man. As I walked along the fence of the rec yard, I spotted my cellmate, standing off on his own, like he had for the last week or so. I shook my head, not even really sure if it was him anymore. I took one last look in the yard, this time from the other side of the fence. I wish I hadn't. There, standing off on his own, on the other side of the yard, was Carl, slouched over, eyeing the other inmates, and twitching manically. I've been staying in my family's remote cabin for the last 3 nights. Something has been knocking on my window. Alright, I don't know where to start. I'm in a motel room that smells like steel cigarettes and bleach, but 100 miles from where I was last night. For context, I work a job that essentially melts your brain, you know the kind. Endless spreadsheets, back-to-back video calls where everyone talks over each other. A consistent barrage of emails that are all marked urgent. After a particular brutal 6-month project, I was completely fried, a walking zombie. My boss, to his credit, saw it and basically ordered me to take 2 weeks off. Go somewhere with no cell service, he said. The first place that came to my mind was my father's old cabin. It's not really just my father's. It was his father's before him and his father before that. It's been in the family for a century, maybe more. A small, sturdy log cabin deep in the woods, miles from the nearest town. It's the literal definition of off the grid. A well for water, generator for a few hours of electricity at night, and a fireplace for heat. It was the perfect place to disconnect, to just sit in silence and let my brain unscramble itself. My dad passed away a few years ago. We weren't estranged, but we weren't close. He was a quiet, solitary man, and the cabin was a sanctuary. I have a few hazy, heavy memories of being there as a little kid. The smell of pine needles and wood smoke, the feel of rough-hewn timber under my bare feet, him teaching me how to skip stones on the nearby creek. Going back felt like a way to honor him, I guess. A way to find some of that place he always seemed to have when he was there. The drive up was long, the last hour on a winding dirt road that was more pothole than path. When I finally pulled up, the other place looked exactly as I remembered. The logs were a darker, more weathered gray. The porch sagged a little on one side, but it was solid. The air was clean and cold, and the silence was so cold it felt like a weight in my ears. No cars, no sirens, no people. Just a weird sighing through the massive pines that surrounded the property like ancient sentinels. I spent the first day just existing. I unpacked my meager supplies, books, non-perishable food, and a couple of good bottles of whiskey. I swept the dust off the floor, started a fire on the hearth, and sat on the porch watching the sun go down, painting the sky in fiery oranges and purples. For the first time in months, the knot in my chest started to loosen. The first night, I fired up the generator for a few hours to run the lights and read. The cabin had two main windows in the living area, big, single panes of glass that looked out into the impenetrable blackness of the forest. As soon as I flipped on the lamp beside my armchair, they came, the moths. It's normal, of course. A single point of light in an ocean of darkness. You're going to attract every insect for miles. They floated and danced against the glass, dozens of them, their dusty wings like soft gray snow against the pane. I barely noticed them. It was a familiar, almost comforting sound of the wilderness. The soft, papery thump, thump, thump of their bodies hitting the window. I read for an hour, turned off the generator, and fell into the deepest, most dreamless sleep I'd had in years. The second day was even better. I chopped some wood for the fire and went for a long hike. and felt the city stress sloughing off me with every step. I was reconnecting with something primal, something real. The world felt simple again. That night I did the same thing. I fired up the generator, poured myself a small whiskey, and settled in with my book, and again the moths came. At first, it was the same as the night before, a chaotic flurry of wings against the glass. But as the minutes stretched on, I started to notice something, a sound beneath the general chaos, a single, persistent tapping. It was distinct from the soft, fleshy thuds of the other moths. It was sharper, more deliberate. I looked up from my book, trying to pinpoint it. On the right-hand window, a large, pale moth, bigger than the others, almost the size of my thumb, was clinging to the glass. It wasn't fluttering. It was perfectly still, except for its wings. It would lift one wing and strike it against the pane. It was odd, but I shrugged it off. Insects are weird. I went back to my book, but I couldn't focus. The sound was impossible to ignore now that I'd isolated it. There was a rhythm to it. I paused, then again. I closed my book and I just watched. The big moth stayed in the same spot, its wings methodically striking the glass. It was bizarre. I'd never seen a moth do anything like it. It felt like less an insect attracted to lay and more like something knocking, trying to get my attention. I know it sounds crazy. I thought it was crazy then. I chalked it up to being alone, my mind playing tricks on me. In the overwhelming silence, I shut off the generator early, and the tapping stopped the instant the light went out. The silence that rushed to fill the void felt heavier than before. The next day, the thought of the tapping moth followed me around. It was a splinter in my mind. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just witnessed something deeply unnatural. The perfect solitude of the cabin now felt watchful. The woods seemed to be holding their breath. That evening, I was almost hesitant to turn on the generator, but the thought of sitting in complete darkness was worse, so I pulled the cord. The engine sputtered to life, and the lights flickered on. I didn't even pretend to read. I just sat in the armchair, whiskey in hand, and waited. Within minutes, the cloud of moths were back, and sure enough, there it was. The same large pale moth, in almost the exact same spot on the window. It was still for a moment, and then the tapping began. This time, I was ready. I grabbed a pen and an old leather-bound journal I found in the desk drawer. My grandfather's by the look of the faded initials on the cover. I didn't know what I was doing exactly. It just felt like something I had to do. A challenge. I decided to log the tapes. I made a simple system. A dot for a short, quick tap, and a dash for a slightly longer, more resonant one. I noted the pauses between sequences. For the next 3 hours, I sat there like some mad scientist, my eyes glued to the moth, my pen scratching across the yellowed paper of the journal. The world shrank to the single pane of glass and the rhythmic sound echoing in the small, warm room. Page after page, filled with my frantic scribbles of dots and dashes. The moth was tireless, and never seemed to stop, save for the deliberate pauses between its tapping. My hands started to cramp, my eyes burned from the strain. But I couldn't stop. I was compelled. There was a logic to it, a structure that was too consistent to be random. The pen fell from my hand and clattered onto the wooden floor. Morse code. It couldn't be. It was the most insane, ridiculous idea I'd ever had. Mouse can't type out Morse code. It's impossible. It's a violation of every law of nature I understood. But the patterns on the page, they looked so familiar. I remember learning some of it as a kid in Scouts. 3 dots for S, 3 dashes for O. I looked out the window. The moth was tapping out SOS. My blood went cold. I grabbed my phone. It had no service, but the battery was full. I downloaded a bunch of stuff before I left, just in case of emergencies. Books, movies, and a survival guide app. I foamed it open. My fingers slick with sweat. The app had utility section, flashlight, compass, and a Morse code chart. My heart was hammering against my ribs so hard I could feel it in my throat. I pulled the journal into my lap, turned to the first page of my transcription, and began to translate. My hands were shaking so bad it was hard to trace the lines. The first few sentences were jumbled gibberish. I probably misheard them and wrote them down wrong. I felt a wave of relief. It was nothing, just my overreaction to imagination. I was about to laugh at myself and to pour a stiff whiskey and call it a night. But then I got a sequence. I was sure I recorded perfectly. It was long and the rhythm had been incredibly clear. I went letter by letter. U, N, D, E, R. Under. My breath hitched. Okay, coincidence. It had to be. I kept going, my eyes scanning the pages of dots and dashes, comparing them to the chart on my phone screen. The next clear word I translated was Hungry. Hungry. The air in the cabin suddenly felt thin and cold. I stood up and paced the small room, the old floorboards groaning under my feet. Hungry. This wasn't a coincidence. This was a message. But who was sending it, and how? This moth was just an insect. It couldn't think. It couldn't reason. I spent the rest of the night translating. The generator sputtered and died around 2 a.m., plunging the room into darkness and silence. The tapping stopped instantly. I didn't sleep. I sat in the dark, the words I translated burning in my mind. Soon, deep, weight, stone, roots. They were disjointed single words, fragments of a thought. It was like listening to someone talking in their sleep, but they painted a terrifying and presnic picture. Something was under, but under what? Under the cabin? Something deep, something made of stone and tangled in roots, and it was hungry, waiting. I felt that I may be overreacting and my mind just completing a puzzle that doesn't exist. The next day I was a wreck, and I didn't hike, and I didn't chop wood. I barely ate, and I searched the cabin looking for, I don't know what, a clue, an explanation. I tore through the drawers in my father's old desk, the bookshelf filled with old paperbacks, and then I found it, tucked in the back of my grandfather's journal I'd been using, a section at the very end where the handwriting changed from my grandfather's neat cursive to my great-grandfather's spiderly scrawl. The entries were short and cryptic. October 12, 1934. The generator is a blessing, but the light calls to it must be sparing. May 3rd, 1938. Dug a new well. Hit stone at 20 feet. Smooth black stone, not slate. Filled it back in. Will draw from the creek. September 21st, 1945. It sleeps, but it listens, the old man knew. The silence is its cradle. The noise is its dream. Do not wake the dream. July 16, 1952. Tell the boy to keep the lamps low. Never dig past the old oak. Some things are best left buried. Some hunger never dies. My blood turned to ice. Some hunger never dies. My ancestors, did they know? That night, I knew I had to listen. I was terrified. Every primal instinct in my body screamed at me to get in my car and drive. But another part of me, a morbid obsessed curiosity, had to know the rest of the story. I didn't know what I was sitting on top of. I fired up the generator. The moths came. The tapping began. This time, the messages were different. They were longer, more coherent. It was as if, by listening, I somehow strengthened the connection. The moth tapped and I wrote, my hand flying across the page. It felt like I was taking dictation from beyond the grave. I didn't wait to translate. I filled page after page of the journal, the dots and dashes becoming a blur. The moth was tapping faster now, more urgently. The air in the room grew thick, heavy with a strange static energy. The light from the lamp seemed to dim, as if the very air was absorbing it. Finally, after hours, the moth stopped. It fell from the window pane, a tiny lifeless husk on the porch outside. The other moths swirled confused before disappearing into the night silence. I sat there for a long moment, my chest tightened with a suffocating dread. Then, with trembling hands, I picked up my phone and began to translate the last long message. The story it told was not of this world. It spoke of a time before the trees, before the soil. It spoke of a vast, silent intelligence that fell from the stars and burrowed deep into the cooling earth to escape the harsh light of the sun. It described itself not as a creature of flesh and blood, but of patience and gravity and hunger. It spoke of the first people, my ancestors who found it. They didn't understand it, but they feared it. They felt its presence in the deep rock, a coldness that seeped up from the ground. They couldn't kill it, so they bound it. They performed rituals, laid down great stones, and buried it under layers of earth and prayer, entombing it in a silent, dreamless sleep. The message explained that it could not see or hear. Its only sense was a form of perception tied to energy. For millennia, its only sensations were the slow warmth of the sun deep in the earth, the crawling of roots, the shifting of rock. It slept. But the coming of man brought new sensations, fire, the vibrations of voice, and then electricity, artificial light, to its ancient dormant consciousness. This light was a piercing scream in an eternity of silence, a sharp, painful needle pricking its awake. It couldn't move, not yet. The bindings of the first man were strong, but it could reach out. It could touch the tiny, simple nervous systems of the creatures drawn to the light, the insects. It could borrow their bodies, use their frantic energy to beat against the barrier of my window, to tap out its story, its plea, its warning. It's the only language it could form from the binary chaos of their fluttering. I felt sick. My family built a watchtower, a prison guard shack, and for generations they had kept the watch, living quiet, sparingly so as to not disturb the prisoner in the dungeon below. My father, with his quiet solitude, was a warden, and I, with my city stress and my desperate need for light and noise, had been shaking the bars of the cell door all week. My eyes scanned the last few lines of my transcription. A new frantic tapping had begun just before the moth died. It was short, precise. I translated the last sequence of dots and dashes, my pencil scratching across the page. My heart stopped. I read it again to be sure. It wakes when the light goes out. As my mind processed the final horrifying word, a sound came from the porch, a low electrical buzz. I looked up from the journal. The bare bulb above the porch door, the very light that had drawn the moss, was flickering. It buzzed, a dying insect sound, followed with a brilliant, painfully intensity, and then went dark. The lamp beside me flickered in sympathy, and then it died too, as the generator outside coughed, sputtered, and fell silent, plunging me into absolute, total darkness. The rhythmic tapping was gone. The world was utterly silent, not the peaceful silence of the forest I had craved, but a dead, waiting, profound silence, the kind of silence that listens. I didn't breathe. I couldn't move. My entire being was focused on listening. And then I heard it. It wasn't a sound from outside. It wasn't the wind, or a branch falling, or an animal. It came from directly beneath my feet, from under the floorboards, from deep in the earth the cabin was built upon. It was a slow, heavy, scraping sound. The sound of something impossible, ancient, and vast shifting its weight, the grating of stone against stone, the sound that vibrated up through the soles of my shoes and into my bones. It was the sound of a tomb door grinding open after 1,000 years. I didn't scream. The sound was trapped in my throat, a choked, pathetic little gasp. That was it. The spell of a morbid curiosity was broken, shattered by a blast of pure animal terror. I didn't think, I just reacted. I scrambled backwards, knocking over the armchair, my hands flailing in the dark. I crept to walk away from the sound, my only thought being out. I found the door by touch, fumbled with the bolt, my fingers feeling useless. The scraping sound was louder now, a deep, resonant groan that seemed to shake the very foundations of the cabin. The door flew open and I fell into the porch, gulping the cold night air. I didn't look back. I sprinted across the clearing to my car, my keys already in hand, jabbing them at the lock. The scraping was a constant grinding vibration on the ground now. I threw myself into the driver's seat, jammed the key in the ignition, and prayed. The engine turned over on the first try. I've never been so grateful for the roar of an internal combustion engine in my entire life. I slammed the car into reverse, not caring about the trees, and spun the wheel, my tires spitting gravel. The headlights cut a frantic swathe through the darkness, illuminating the front of the cabin for a split second. There was nothing there, just the dark windows and the silent porch. But the ground in front of the steps, it looked wrong. It looked raised, like something was pushing up from below. I didn't wait to see what it was. I stomped on the accelerator and flied down the winding dirt road, the car bucking and sliding, branches whipping across the windows. I didn't slow down until the dirt turned to asphalt, and I didn't stop driving until the sun started to rise, and I saw the blessed, ugly, beautiful glow of a motel sign. So here I am, writing this. I left everything back there, my clothes, my father's memories, my grandfather's journal, with its terrible notes. I can never go back. I know that. The cabin, my family's legacy, it's gone. It's a tomb, and I open the door. All I know is that something is awake that should have slept forever. If y'all enjoyed this video, please consider liking and subscribing. It really helps out the channel. And with that, I'll see you in the next video.